Anna is currently the director of operations at Nozzle.io, a Utah technology startup providing data to digital marketers. Anna is an experienced analyst with background in policy research, needs assessment, survey research, data management, quantitative methods and demographics, and is the co-author of several published studies. Previously, she was a research associate at the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute, compiling studies on economic impact, employees, and the experiences of Utah women and potential drivers behind the wage gap. She received a BA in political science from BYU and an MPP from the University of Utah. When not working as an analyst, she volunteers with the PTA and is planning her future political campaign, which is for city council or state council, or we'll figure it out. But so you may be seeing her in the future in political campaigns, or she's spending time with her husband and two young girls. So thank you so much for coming tonight, Anna, and please welcome Anna Bergevin.
What time do we wrap up? What time do you usually wrap up?
However long you want to go, usually about 5 or shortly after, because there's usually questions and answers.
Okay, sounds good. So, like he said, my name is Anna Bergevin, and I'm talking today mostly about my career in program management and applied research. Like he said, I'm now at a tech startup. I'll talk a little about that later, but it's a little bit of a departure from my experience, so I won't be talking about that a whole lot. So like he said, BA at BYU, MPP from the U of U in 2014, a certificate in demography. If you're wondering what demography is, it's a study of populations. So it's about population growth, population trends, fertility, rise and decline in migration. So that relates actually a lot to public policy. For example, right, baby boomers are retiring, so we're going to see a heavy load on Social Security and Medicare, which is going to affect our taxation levels. In migration, documented and undocumented, has been supplementing our fertility rate in the United States, which means the taxpayers supporting those baby boomers, lots of people who aren't migrants aren't having as many kids. So whether or not we have migration or not, anyway, that's how demography relates to public policy. I've had a career in what I'm going to term applied research, and I'm married, and I have 2 kids, a 7-year-old and a 1-year-old. Let's see. Okay, so like I thought at first I would describe what the field of public research, applied research is. Applied research differs from, let's say, what your professors do in that it's done on a much shorter timeline. It's very applied to usually a more narrow situation. It may attempt to be generalizable or it may not, depending on the purpose of the research. Sometimes people in my field do publish. I've been published a few times, but it's very different than professors who focus on something very specific and are building the field of knowledge, whereas we're doing things that have a very specific public purpose that's going to be used immediately. Ideally, we work together, right? Academic researchers and applied researchers. Okay, so there's 4 kinds of areas in the field. You can work in the government, like literally you are hired by the government, in a legislative or executive capacity. So this would be like you're a legislative staffer. So the Congressional Budget Office that puts out estimates of what this new tax plan is going to cost, $1 trillion added to the deficit. People with degrees in public policy and economics, things like that, we do that kind of work. Executive staff members, you work for the health department or the governor's office or the federal government doing research. So the second type is like partisan applied research. So these are people who do polling, they do background research on constituents, they do work for elected officials. So if you work for the legislature and you write a memo about immigration, it's going to be probably a different memo than if you're Orrin Hatch's research associate who's writing whatever Orrin Hatch wants you to write about immigration. The purpose is different, the direction is different. Advocacy research. So someone I know for grad school, for example, works for the Utah Health Policy Project. So she's writing memos about health policy, trying to advocate for Medicaid expansion. And someone who works in These other types of, well, partisan people might do that, but people who work for the government aren't supposed to advocate, right? So the purpose of the research is different. Sometimes advocacy research is very frustrating for those of us that work in other parts of research because it can be really distracting. The quality can be great or it can be poor. So advocacy research is kind of mixed. And then I didn't know how to label this. I'm going to call this public service or independent research. So these are people who work for academic research centers or think tanks. And let's see. So this last one is where I have worked, right? So I worked at this building. The Thomas S. Monson Center is a new research. The building is brand new. The research center's been around for a while. Where we were housed, they still are housed, where I worked until I switched in April. And it's right on South Temple, right by the Cathedral of the Madeleine. Okay, so I include GIFs and PowerPoints because I find them enjoyable. So what do someone like me do? What exactly kind of research do we do? So my boss, Natalie Gardner, who has worked for Mike Leavitt when he was governor and then when he was the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and now she runs the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute and works in the School of Business as an associate dean at the U of U. And she came up with this term, informed decisions, which means the role of our research at the Gardner Policy Institute is to provide policymakers who make decisions with better information so they make better decisions. So that can look at, there's a lot of forms, a lot of stuff people do. That can be policy analysis, program evaluation, economic impact studies, public engagement research, which is what I worked mostly in, although I did some of all of this, and then employee studies, which kind of straddles the line between public research and organizational behavior. So an example of something I worked on was a wage gap study. So the legislature has a Women in the Economy Commission, which was created by law, and we got a grant from the Walmart Foundation to do research about women's experiences with the economy and maybe why Utah's wage gap is larger than other areas in the nation. So this is qualitative research. We had, I think, 12 focus groups all over the state, from Kanab to Logan, Vernal, Salt Lake, Utah County. So we talked to all these women and asked them about their experiences. I won't get into the details because I'm not really talking about my research, but the point is people in Utah, we get this impression that women either want to stay home or they want to work, and what we learned is it's really complicated. For every woman, it's a very complicated decision, and childcare isn't very affordable. There's a lot of reasons. Anyway, so you don't have to read this quote. This is a quote from a Deseret News article they wrote on the wage gap. So sometimes you get quoted in the news, not very often. Very often, if you're in this field, it can feel like nobody is reading your research, and it can be discouraging. But the truth is, only a few people need to read it, the people who are making decisions about it. Sometimes you do need the public to read and understand the research to get movement behind things. This is a second example. It's very different. This was my capstone. I did a study about cytomegalovirus, which I had never heard of before this study. It's a virus women get when they're pregnant and can cause their babies to have birth defects and hearing loss. It is the leading cause of non-genetic hearing loss, actually. So they're trying to prevent and screen for it in Utah. They passed a law, and we did a cost-benefit analysis finding out if that saved the state money or hurt the state. Turns out it saves the state money every year. So the money they spend on the program comes back to them in saved costs. So that was, I basically did that because it was an opportunity to learn cost-benefit analysis from a really smart economist who worked with me on it, but it was really interesting. Okay, so I thought it would be helpful for you to understand, what does day-to-day life look like when you're an applied researcher? And the first thing is you spend a lot of time alone gathering data and writing, not unlike a faculty member at a university might be. You're hunting down data, you're cleaning data, you're writing, you're outlining, you're rewriting, you're editing, lots of time alone, which you have to be okay with. Collaboration, you do sometimes work in teams, so that would be research design, planning logistics, we're holding 12 focus groups. Where are we going to hold them? Who's going to bring food? How are people going to get paid? And then draft review, reviewing each other's work and making it better. There's a lot more time than you would think on administrative tasks. So this is writing proposals for research to get it funded, grant writing, budgets, hiring, tracking expenses, time cards, all the stuff that I wish we didn't have to do. Meetings is probably my favorite part of this job. This is where we, are meeting with our clients, delivering the research, helping them figure out what it means for them and their decisions. And then the last part is occasional public events. It's pretty rare. It's really fun when we get to do this, but going to conferences or summits or panels, that happens a lot more for the directors of the institutes than it does for lower level research associates like me. So just a quick bit about my career path and how I got to do this interesting work. I graduated in 2007 from BYU, and I went into a PhD program. So if any of you are considering a PhD program, I'm happy to tell you why I left. I'm pro PhDs, just not pro PhD for me. And anyway, it was a complicated decision, but I left, I came back, and I had to call Dr. Hawkins, Darren Hawkins, and tell him he was going to get calls. I said, thanks for writing me those letters of recommendation. I dropped out of grad school. Please give me a good reference. And he said, well, we have a job opening. Come apply for it. So I did. And I came and worked with him and Dr. Wilson, Dr. Finley, and Dr. Nielsen at what was then called PLAD, is now called Aid Data, a research project on foreign aid. I don't know if that's still housed here, if it's all moved out to William & Mary now. But I left that to go back to grad school in a master's in public policy. I chose public policy because I wanted something more quantitative than an MPA, but I didn't want to have to do a bunch of prereqs to do a master's in stats. So I did an MPP with a certificate in demography, so I could be very quantitative but applied. In 2013, I did an internship in policy research for the Salt Lake City Council, which was really interesting and I really loved it. And then in 2013-14, my second year of grad school, I had a graduate assistantship. CPPA merged with another research center. So that's the same thing as the Kem C Gardner Policy Institute. That merger happened while I was there. So I stayed after I graduated and they gave me a job, which was fantastic. Didn't have to go job hunt after graduation. And then in 2017, I left my cush, awesome research job to become the director of operations at a tech startup. My husband, who's here, is a founder in a software development startup, and they needed someone to come help with everything except writing the software. So I now do like 5 people's jobs, and it's a very different environment. The reasons for that, it's very complicated, some personal, some I'm happy to share. It was a shorter commute, the pay was the same. It's very flexible for my family, and my family obviously has a lot invested in this startup, and it was a way I could support the development, and it's really interesting. I'm still doing, eventually that role is going to grow into a data science role, which is more of a private sector application of my research skills. So like, the thing about these jobs, working at a think tank, having substantive, interesting research jobs, is there aren't a lot of them, especially in Utah. But even on the federal level, finding an interesting job that pays well is somewhat of a unicorn. So how did I do this? So I just asked, like, things are not always posted. I don't remember what the stat is. It's like 1 in 4 jobs is posted on the internet, like ever gets posted. Everything else is networking. So my first research job was as a research assistant here at BYU. It was not posted. I went and bothered Dr. Hawkins, not during his office hours. I just knocked on his door and said, do you know anyone who's hiring a research assistant? And he said, I would love to hire you. So that was my first job. And then all along the way, it was pretty much almost every job I got was not. Actually, I'm trying to think if any of them were ever posted. They were not. So networking, like having good relationships is, I know this is like a super cliche thing to say, but networking is really, really important. Staying in touch with your friends from school. You never know who is going to be working somewhere, who can put in a good word and get you an interview. Staying in touch with colleagues, going to events in the field, getting to know people is really important. And being able to have really good references when people call can make the difference between you getting hired and someone else getting hired. If they call your reference, they go, oh yeah, they were good, versus, oh, you better hire them or you're gonna regret it. That's very different reference. And having been on the hiring end now, I can tell you, you get a lot of decent candidates and only a few really standout candidates. So performance, you just have to be very good at research to get these jobs, to keep these jobs, to get promoted. So you have to be a very good writer. Do they still have Poli-Sci 200? Yes, that class is the devil, and probably the best thing they make you do. You have to be a good writer, and I can't tell you how many applications. Usually, it's probably good for you to know, often if you apply for a job like this, they want a writing sample. So that capstone that you're gonna be like the night before, just like cramming and like trying to get it out, you may wanna refine it after finals and make it look better, because you're probably going to be using it or something like it if you're applying for a job like this. And part of this is luck. Is there an opening when you want the job? Do they have funding to make an opening? These jobs don't open very often, and so part of this is just timing. And part of this is just instinct. So, right, my PhD program was probably the most challenging, definitely was the most challenging coursework that I had ever done. It was very challenging and interesting, and I had a gut feeling it just was not the right place for me. There's a more complicated story behind that, but I 90% do not regret dropping out of my PhD program. There's like 10% of me that's still a little, I don't know, sad about it. Okay, so like how do you get to these jobs? You basically have to go to graduate school. The more quantitative, probably the better. But there are people who get an MPA, which is not very quantitative at all. That's more geared towards being an administrator in the government, but who do end up making their way back to these jobs. But really, you want the broadest skill set possible, so more quantitative is generally better. To be a director of a think tank or something like this, usually you need a PhD. Not always, but it's really helpful to get promoted. And basically, the only way at the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute we get people in those lower level positions is we hire graduate assistants. There's very rarely a job, an entry-level job, that goes out posted wide. So don't wait till after you graduate. If you're interested in this, you should get an internship towards the end of your schooling and then maintain good relationships, and hopefully there's an opening when you're done. Okay, so ways to stand out. I cannot say enough that you just have to be very good, like top 10% of all applicants good. It's interesting when you get a stack of like 20 applications, how quickly you can narrow it down to like 3. You're like, no, not this person, not this person. Like, just the resume not looking good, the writing sample being terrible. Cannot tell you how many bad writing samples I've read. So just do good work. I mean, that sounds cliche, but it's critical, right? So this is a field where it's easy to be evaluated. How you write in your writing sample obviously is going to affect how you write your research when you get there. So it's a really good way for us to screen people. Second, you have to stay up to date on everything. You know how they have like free New York Times here? It's a habit. You just need to develop it. You're going to have to read the news all the time. You're going to have to know what's going on. You can't show up at the office and not know that James Comey got fired yesterday. Like, it's part of your job to be aware of what's happening. And really, I don't know why you'd want to be a researcher if that's not something, if you don't like reading the news anyway, it's a personality thing, I suppose. But Mike Christensen, who was until recently the head of the Office of Legislative Research at the Capitol, says when he interviews people, he always asks them, what have you been reading lately? Meaning, what books have you read lately? And he says he feels like this tells him a lot about a person, right? So are you a lifelong learner? Are you a person who's interested in things? I thought that was such an interesting interview question, and actually very true. Most of my colleagues are always reading something. They're always interested in something. So just being up to date on the world, on your field, on your skill set, that's really important. And finally is attitude. I have managed a lot of research assistants, and I've managed a lot of research assistants where I give them a grunt level task and they say, well, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, but we are paying you and you're the lowest person on the totem pole. Like, if you complain like that, like no one wants to promote that person. Who wants to work with the person who's not a team player? So, I worked with great people at the Policy Institute, people who work really hard, who are really committed to a high standard of what we put out, who feel really proud of what we do, and who work hard to make each other better. So it's good to be confident about what you do and what you're good at, and it's good to say, I'm good at these skills, but I want to learn these new things. That's kind of part of a job like this is like, oh, there's a training on REMI, which is a economic impact modeling software. I want to go learn that. There's no shame in not already knowing REMI, but it's important to be aware that your colleagues above you have a lot more experience, and be excited and willing to learn from them. You have to do the grunt work. Somebody has to enter data or clean data or copy edit before we publish, and that stuff's not glamorous, but that's part of the job, especially when you're young in your career. And it's good to look for opportunities, but to be a team player. So don't look like you're always trying to elbow out people on your same level, because you're always fighting to get the attention or to get the exciting task. There's something to be said for a colleague who's just happy to do whatever's needed and excited when they get an assignment to do it really well. So attitude cannot be, we have had graduate assistants who, having had them work for us because they were only here for 1 year, we would never hire based on probably this alone. So attitude is really, really important. General advice. This is a book. If you listen to nothing else I say today, please go buy this book. I don't know these people. I'm not like plugging someone's book who I'm like friends with. This book, Designing Your Life, is probably the best career book I've ever read. Bill Burnett and Dave Evans are professors at the Stanford Design School, and this is about applying design thinking to your career and to your life. And so they talk a lot about prototyping. So in your career, it's helpful to think about, you're not going to get it right the first time, right? Your first job out of college isn't like the perfect fit. You find one that's a decent fit, you find out what you like about it, what you don't like about it, and you modify as you go along, right? So I went to a PhD program, and I loved the research side of it. I didn't love the idea of how rigid a career in academia is. It's basically 6 years of graduate school, 6 years till you get tenure, so 12 years of really, really intensive research and publishing and studying, and that I wanted to have children before I was, 35, and I was worried about how those things would go together. That's not to say you cannot have children and be a PhD program, even as a woman. I definitely know people who've done it. I just knew I would get really, really burned out. So anyway, so I pivoted and I went and got a different research job, and I really liked it, and then I realized I wasn't going to get the best interesting jobs until I went back to graduate school, so I went to graduate school. And then I realized part of why I left the Gardner Policy Institute is I was tired of telling decision makers how to make decisions. I just wanted to make the decisions, and I knew that running for office was going to be challenging. I don't know how it would have gone over with my boss, but we're an independent, nonpartisan organization, so having one of your employees running for a partisan office would be complicated. And definitely if I had won, I couldn't have stayed there. So, and I also didn't have the time. So I left. Anyway, this book, read it. Read it before you graduate. I wish I had read it 10 years ago when I was in your position. Last, I wanted to give some advice specifically to LDS women. This organization, Aspiring Mormon Women, is a nonprofit, and they have a website, they have events, and they have an online Facebook forum. I'd really encourage you to check it out. It's a very good supportive network for LDS professional women. It's been really a good support to me and to a lot of my friends. But in general, what I hear in that forum, what I hear from my friends and from my experience, the important thing is you may decide you want to have a less aggressive career if you have children, when you have children. I definitely did. What I haven't mentioned here is, since I have had my children, I have never worked full-time. I've always had part-time jobs. And those were not listed part-time jobs. Those were negotiated part-time jobs because I wanted to be around for my kids more. That was important to me. Other women I know love to continue to work full-time. But the point is, I do see women who make compromises in their career, anticipating getting married, anticipating having children. Sometimes that happens, sometimes that doesn't. Anyway, life just has a way of being different than you thought it would be. And so my advice is just work really hard, lean into your career, and then make adjustments when you need to. I will also tell you, my friends who are more educated and have better skills have more bargaining power. And bargaining power plays into wages and promotion. It also plays into negotiating things like part-time work and telecommuting that can be really helpful when you have a family. And I just feel like networking with other LDS women it's been helpful for me and for a lot of women I know. Lastly, this is BYU, so I thought I would mention this. When I was your age, thought, Like every major decision in my life, major meaning like, should I move across the country to this PhD program in Ohio or should I move to California? I thought I would get a strong feeling. I thought I would receive a lot of confirmation and guidance from the Spirit. And I have rarely felt that. I have mostly felt that it was my decision, which has been great. But I have to say that sometimes you do get a really strong feeling, and I think it's super important to pay attention to. Obviously, we believe that in our faith, and I just wanted to tell you, coming 10 years later, I look back and almost never received revelation, except when I did, and then it was undeniable. There wasn't really a lot of gray area for me. And so take that for what it will. Everyone's different. So anyway, that's all the slides I have prepared. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer questions.
Hi, so on your slides you have a lot of different topics in there, and I was just wondering if you could expand on like the program evaluation sector of research.
Right. So there's a lot of different, I don't know if I'd call them methods, but types of research. So program evaluation is kind of an example of that's what I did with my capstone, which is the state of Utah passed this law. They have a screening program, and people can evaluate for effectiveness. They can evaluate for cost effectiveness, like what's this costing us? Is it costing us what we thought it would cost us when we passed this law? Is this program effective? What does that even mean? Is that measurable? I actually love program evaluation. We didn't do it a ton at the Policy Institute. That tends to be done more in-house. So the Department of Health in Utah might do a lot of program evaluation, but they do it internally, right? So they have researchers or analysts who do that and evaluate their programs. It doesn't happen, in my opinion, enough. Government funding is usually slim. Evaluations are not cheap. And it's hard to often get funding to do it. So, but they do. And when they do, so currently, you may have heard of social impact bonding. So, right, the state of Utah passed a bond. Goldman Sachs is funding private preschool or public preschool. And then they're trying to evaluate if fewer of those students who were predicted to have ended up in special education did, and then the state only has to pay back Goldman Sachs if the program was effective, if it reduced special ed enrollment. It's very controversial. That one is very controversial. There's a big New York Times piece about it, saying that the test that you give a 4-year-old to predict whether or not they're gonna be in special ed is not reliable. And so we're basically paying Goldman when we don't know if we should be. Some advocates deny that, and some people just want public preschool so they don't care. But that's one way they use program evaluation, social impact bonding. Can you come to the microphone? They want to record it, I guess.
Okay, what are some recommendations you would give when negotiating salary?
Oh, goodness. Well, you need to do your research, which can be tricky to find out what is typical for that position. And something to really, really keep in mind with government jobs is often the benefits are as much or more than the salary. So I'll just tell you, for example, at the University of Utah, the health insurance is worth about $20,000 a year. It's no deductible, it's amazing health insurance to cover your whole family, it's fantastic. So even if my salary offer at the U is lower than it would be if I worked for a nonprofit or a private sector or somewhere else, that you really have to take into account the whole package. And then if in the end, I will say my first offer out of grad school, I looked at another job at the state legislature, which was comparable in skill set and comparable in just what the work actually was that you would be doing. And I knew what they were paying because they advertised what they were paying for that job. I didn't want that job because I'm a mom, and during the legislative session, they work 1 million hours. It's actually my dream job, maybe someday when my kids are older. But I knew what that paid. And so when my boss came in and offered, my boss from when I was a graduate student offered me a full-time job, I knew it was really low. And I said, here's what the legislature is paying. And she said, we can't afford that. But they came up $3 an hour, which I guess is equal to, I don't know, $6,000 a year. So you have to know not just like, not really what you're worth, but what other people are paying. And you have to be able to negotiate that. And you should always, 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 always counter. Even if you think it's a good offer and you're like, this is my dream job. Like, if they really want you and you counter, they'll just say, this is the best we can pay. They're not going to say, well, now we don't want you because you countered our offer. It's not offensive, it's expected. And there are a lot of studies on this. Women don't counter and men do. It's part of what leads to the wage gap. Women get that first job, they don't counter, men do, and then that pay difference compounds over time. So women especially, men you should also counter, but you probably were going to anyway. So women, you're wanting to be nice, you're wanting to be a people pleaser, well, please your family by countering and getting better pay. So that's my advice.
And they might be interested to know that all of Utah's public employees' salaries are public.
Yes. Oh, I forgot about this. Okay, so this is tricky. There's a website called Utah's Right to Know. This can be depressing because you'll look up like your boss's salary and you'll be like, oh my gosh, they make so much more than me. But those salaries include benefits. And different people in the state, especially people who are even older than me, are in a different retirement plan, so their compensation is different for a lot of reasons. But you could look up, let's say you're coming in and you know this other research associate was only hired a year ago. You should go look up their salary, know what they're getting. You should acknowledge maybe they have different experience than you, and that should be weigh in, but it'll give you a benchmark. And yeah, like the state of Utah pays 14% into your retirement. So the salary's lower, but you get 14%. Like the private sector, it's zero. It's zero unless you put in and they match, and maybe they match at 5%. So you have to keep in mind all the benefits, and when you read those Utah's Right to Know numbers, they look really large, but they include benefits. You have to kind of adjust for that.
So I'm hoping to one day go to a PhD program as well. And
Awesome.
You had mentioned family as one of the reasons why it wasn't a super great fit, and especially I want to make sure that I am a good father in the future and that I don't leave them behind in graduate school. But with that, and maybe what are some other personality traits that lead to success or lack of in graduate school?
Graduate school. So you have to just not care that you're going to be paid terribly for 6 years while you're in graduate school, doing a lot of work and taking a terrible stipend. And apparently now the Republicans want to tax your stipend, which I think is crazy. I don't know how any graduate student could afford that. But I would say actually, so the reasons I left, academia can be very family friendly. You should talk to a lot of your professors. I mean, things like you're kind of the master of your own schedule. You can go to your kid's preschool graduation in the middle of the day because you can, but it is very time intensive, especially before tenure. So you may be flexible in your hours, right? But when your kids go to bed, you have to work some more. So my advisor at Ohio State, Jan Buck-Steffensmeyer, is a chaired professor. She's very experienced, so she's already got tenure, and she talked to me. She had 4 kids. She's Catholic, so very into her family, and she said, I come to work at 7, I work until 3, I go drive carpool, I make dinner, I get my kids to bed, and then I work until I go to bed. And she already has tenure. She said to me, you basically have to love this so much, it's what you would do anyway, right? Your kids go to bed and you want to work on your paper more. You're excited about it. You have to really just love research and accept that if you have, she basically told me, and I think it's good advice, if you have an academic job and you have a family, you may have less time for hobbies or other things in your life because those 2 things both take up a lot of time. But it's definitely possible to do both. So yeah, you have to love research. You have to not mind being alone. You have to have really good time management skills and very good self-discipline, right? So professors or even and graduate students, anyone in academia, you start on a paper and you may work on it for a year, you may work on it for 2 years. You have to be motivated to not get burned out on that paper or to be able to keep things moving when you don't really have a boss breathing down your neck with deadlines. So it's a very self-driven job. And there's a lot of time alone, and you have to be able to, I don't know. It's a good thing to ask a professor about.
You figured out a lot in 1 year. So, say amen.
Yeah, I definitely think it can be a very family-friendly career. It's just good to go in with your eyes open about what your compromises are. And I will say, any job has compromises. My husband's a software engineer, and he goes to work. He comes home at 5, which is fantastic. And then after the kids go to bed, he works till he goes to bed. It's not just academia. Lots of jobs are this way. But the time flexibility is fantastic, that you don't have to stay at the office till 9 and miss your kids' bedtime. It's great.
I'm really interested in your current job as Director of Operations. I'm wondering how your past experiences are, or which of your past experiences are particularly helpful for your current position.
Okay, so I made up my title at my current job, which is an inside joke at our company. I came and the job was very undefined. My job was to take stuff off the CEO's plate and just get it done. And so Director of Operations basically covers that I run the operations of the company. So I'm very organized, which is good because currently I am in charge of finance, sales, marketing. What else am I in charge of, Joe? Yes, I'm in charge of working with the accountant and the lawyer and like writing copy for the website and designing marketing campaigns and figuring out software technology tools and figuring out our systems. That's what I'm really good at, right, is designing how we're going to automate things so that we don't need as many people to manage them. So I guess being really organized was really critical for my job. I have very good quantitative skills. I basically just had to watch a bunch of videos and learn how to do accounting, bookkeeping, and I was really scared I was going to screw it up, but I didn't. So it's being this self-driven, like I can figure stuff out personality, right? I'm a researcher, so I just watched a lot of YouTube videos and Googled when I couldn't figure out how to, you know, convert a convertible note into equity in my bookkeeping software, and I did it, and I'm very proud of myself, and I hope eventually we hire a finance person and I can hand it all off. And yeah, so it's just, my job's, yeah, it's weird. I don't know how I would get this job if I didn't, it was a networking thing, right? I knew the CEO. He said, you're smart. I feel like you can figure this stuff out. So it's the ability to just be flexible and teach yourself stuff. It's probably useful in most jobs, actually. You're not, yeah, that's not the CEO, I know, my husband. He's not the CEO, he's the VP of engineering, anyway. So that is my current job. It's great. The private sector is very different. I wouldn't have switched if I wasn't planning on running for office, and I had other ways to stay involved. I mean, I'm just like, you know, like I was in 4th grade, and I told the recess attendant I wanted to be Madeleine Albright when I grew up. So like, it's been like in me to be in the public sector, like always. So like leaving was really actually hard for me, but I just knew I wanted to run for office, and this was the way to make it happen. So if you are that into public policy, the private sector, it's not as satisfying in a way, but it's also exciting. Things move a lot quicker. The government is like, and academics, the bureaucracy moves slow, and the private sector moves very fast, which is fun. So, any other questions? All right. If you come up with questions later, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can send me a message. My profile's private, but I will add you if I see that you're a young, snappy BYU student. Also, you can mention that you were in this class. I don't add usually people I don't know, but I'll add you. So you can message me with questions.